Here's why House of the Dragon changed George R.R. Martin's story. Welcome to the channel. Subscribe if you love House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, and deep dives into Westerosi lore. Let's begin. Westeros is back, and it's not exactly the same as George R.R. Martin imagined. House of the Dragon has taken the world by storm, drawing fans into the fiery halls of the Targaryens, dragons soaring through the skies, and political intrigue that is just as ruthless as Game of Thrones. But if you've read Martin's Fire and Blood, you might have noticed something curious. The HBO adaptation isn't following the book word for word. In fact, in several key areas, it's diverging in ways that could change how the story is perceived by millions of viewers. So today, we're diving into why House of the Dragon changed George R.R. Martin's story, what these changes mean for the legacy of the Targaryens, and how the show is walking the fine line between faithfulness and adaptation. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these changes were made, how they impact the characters we love, and why even die-hard book fans are either thrilled or frustrated. George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood reads more like a historical account than a traditional narrative. It chronicles the Targaryen dynasty from Aegon the Conqueror to the early years of the Dance of the Dragons. This style presents unique challenges for adaptation. The book is episodic, not cinematic. It reads like a history book with dates, genealogies, and brief overviews of battles. Many characters have minor appearances, making it difficult to give them emotional arcs on screen. The narrative is full of summaries rather than scenes, which makes dramatic moments less immediate. To make the story work for television, HBO needed to change the structure, dramatize events, and expand or even invent key moments. This is where the adaptation process begins, and where changes from Martin's original story become apparent. One of the most noticeable changes in House of the Dragon is how characters have been expanded, sometimes in ways that diverge from the book. Rhaenyra Targaryen. In the books, Rhaenyra is sometimes portrayed as haughty and privileged, with little emotional depth outside her claim to the throne. The show, however, has turned her into a deeply layered character. We see her childhood, friendships, and relationships, giving her a more relatable and human dimension. Her struggles with gender expectations, her claim to the throne, and the pressures of being a mother are dramatized far beyond the brief mentions in the book. These changes make her story more emotionally resonant, but they also shift audience perception. A reader might see her as ambitious and entitled, but viewers now sympathize with her struggles, making the eventual conflicts far more tragic. Daemon Targaryen. Daemon's character has also been expanded. In Fire and Blood, he is dangerous, unpredictable, and ruthless, but the show adds layers of charisma, charm, and even vulnerability. The show depicts Daemon's relationships, both romantic and political, in more detail, giving viewers insight into his motivations. These additions make his betrayals and power plays more dramatic, heightening the tension of the Dance of the Dragons. By expanding characters, HBO transforms Martin's historical accounts into a story that can carry viewers emotionally while keeping the essence of the characters intact. The show has also invented scenes and plot lines that don't exist in Fire and Blood, and in some cases, even contradicted. Examples of added plot lines. 1. Childhood interactions. Scenes showing Rhaenyra and Alicent's childhoods are largely fabricated, but they provide context for later rivalries. These moments allow viewers to see the seeds of animosity grow, creating a more coherent narrative than the book's fragmented account. 2. Character relationships. Certain relationships are expanded for drama. For instance, Ser Criston Cole's story is given far more screen time, including his personal conflicts and loyalties. The book mentions him, but the show humanizes him, creating tension that impacts the main storyline. 3. Foreshadowing for Game of Thrones. The show also adds subtle foreshadowing that doesn't exist in the text. Lines, props, and imagery hint at events centuries later, such as the decline of the Targaryens and the legacy of dragon riding. This wasn't Martin's intent, but it connects the prequel to a wider audience familiar with Game of Thrones. Why these additions matter. By adding these scenes, HBO creates emotional depth for the audience, clarifies motives that the book leaves ambiguous, sets up long-term story arcs with visual and narrative foreshadowing. However, this does mean the story departs from Martin's original historical tone, transforming a chronicle into a serialized drama. Another way the show changes the story is through the timeline of events. Fire and Blood sometimes condenses decades of history into brief paragraphs, but the show stretches or rearranges events for dramatic effect. Examples: battles and conflicts. Battles described in the book as brief summaries are given full cinematic sequences, sometimes with altered outcomes or pacing to heighten tension. Deaths and betrayals. The show occasionally rearranges or dramatizes character deaths to maximize emotional impact. This can create slight continuity differences with the source material. Political decisions. Some key decisions, like alliances and betrayals, are expanded into multi-episode arcs, adding tension and stakes. The effect is a story that feels immediate, suspenseful, and cinematic, but at the cost of strict historical fidelity. George R.R. Martin's original work reads like a history textbook, while HBO's adaptation reads like a thriller. This fundamental shift changes the storytelling. 1. Foreshadowing and suspense. In Fire and Blood, events are often described after they happen, reducing suspense. The show, however, builds tension by keeping viewers in the dark until the last possible moment, adding dramatic irony and shock value. 2. Character sympathy. By giving characters internal struggles, emotions, and conflicting desires, the show encourages viewers to empathize with figures who may have been morally ambiguous in the text. 3. Visual storytelling. The show uses visuals, dragons, fire, costumes, set design, to convey political and emotional tension in ways the book cannot. A single shot of Harrenhal's ruins, for instance, can convey centuries of Targaryen history, something a paragraph in the book can't achieve. This shift prioritizes emotional engagement over strict adherence to historical detail, making the story accessible to a broader audience. There are several practical and artistic reasons for diverging from Martin's story. 1. Audience engagement. A direct adaptation of Fire and Blood would likely feel episodic, dry, or confusing to most viewers. By creating additional scenes, fleshing out characters, and reorganizing events, HBO ensures the story captivates audiences from start to finish. 2. Cinematic storytelling. Television demands visual drama. Battles, betrayals, and emotional confrontations must be shown, not summarized. This is why the show expands fights, councils, and personal conflicts. 3. Foreshadowing Game of Thrones. The show needs to appeal to fans of the original series. By adding subtle connections, visual cues, dialogue, and symbolism, the prequel becomes more relevant and exciting for longtime viewers. 4. Humanizing history. Martin's book chronicles history in a matter of fact.